If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, campers and hunters, what is the most creepy / unexplained thing you've experienced in the wild? Went camping with 2 friends back in 2011. At the time I lived in a rural area which is pretty much in the border of the Amazon jungle. We set up camp under some mango trees near a deserted road and take the first day to explore our surroundings. Night comes and it starts to rain. One of my friends forgot his tarp back home, and since his tent wasn't waterproof we had to share mine. We wake up in the night hearing a calf cry. Sure, there were some properties nearby and it wasn't that uncommon that the cattle would roam around. Then we paid attention. Whatever was making that noise was directly above us. It was coming from up the mango tree. My girlfriend and I decided to go on a camping trip in the back country of Greenbrier County, West Virginia. This was before the movie Wrong Turn, but was the same area that the movie took place. It's very rural, and that's what we wanted in an effort to disconnect for everything and everyone for a weekend. On the second night we are both asleep, but I'm a light sleeper and heard noises that sounded like soft rustling of brush and footsteps that sounded very heavy. I woke the girlfriend who also heard the noises, and I grabbed my pistol with a weapon-mounted light. I slowly unzipped the tent and exited while activating the flashlight and pointing it in the general direction that sounds were coming from. I didn't see anything. I went around the entire perimeter looking for signs of movement or the source of the sounds. The light from the flashlight didn't reveal anything that could possibly be making these noises. I had a bear in my mind the entire time and was very ready to unload all 15 rounds if I had to. After several tense moments of silence I returned to the tent, but I couldn't go back to sleep for a couple hours because I was listening for more creepy sounds from this black abyss of the forest. Nothing. Finally a tense and sweaty sleep. At first light, I left the tent but had my gun with me holstered just in case. I looked around the campsite again searching for signs of animals and noticed some fresh bear tracks that the flashlight on my gun wasn't bright enough to reveal the night before. I followed the tracks that appeared to roam within about 10 feet of the tent. Another camper a few hundred yards from our campsite also heard mysterious sounds in the night and also found bear tracks. It was intense in our tents being within a few feet of a bear while sleeping. Other than that creepy night, the remainder of the trip was awesome and the area was beautiful. Around a year ago my buddy was having a birthday party for his daughter in a park near us. The whole family was there, good time. After a bit we decided to go off in the woods to hike to where a fort had been when we were kids. This was in a chunk of woods that was still pretty big but surrounded by highway and roads on all sides. Anyway, we hike a bit in and my friend stops dead in his tracks. He just points forward. "Do you see that? That lady floating?" We all looked and saw. From our view it really did look like someone levitating off the ground. We got closer and realized what was really going on. A lady had hung herself in the woods, and it didn't seem long ago by the looks of it. After getting ourselves together we called the police. They came out and found the lady's car, parked on the other side of the park, door still open. She had done it that day, maybe hours prior. I've seen some messed up stuff, but that will always take the cake. Still to this day it gives me chills just thinking about it. I was living in Brazil and a friend and I decided to do a one night out and back through mountainous rainforest terrain in one of the southern states. We mostly wanted to get some exercise and do a gear shakeout before going on a longer trip in Patagonia. The experience started out really tough. We were doing almost constant climbing and it was hot. Humidity was near 100% through lush vegetation. Eventually we were pretty much in clouds and completely drenched from sweat and humidity. It was kind of hellish, soaked to the bone with no chance of drying out. Fortunately, at that altitude it gets below freezing frequently at night, so there weren't many insects or animals, only birds. We hiked for probably 8 hours with little progress. It was slow going through tough terrain. At early evening we came to a flat spot, the first we'd seen in hours, and decided to make camp as it was starting to pour. I basically made camp in several inches of standing water. I was beat anyway, so I just sat in my tent reading. Around 3 a.m. I woke to a girl singing in the distance. The singing kept coming closer, until she was singing right at our tents. She pushed past us and the singing drifted off. She was singing, maybe a lullaby, or children's song? About rain in Portuguese, but it sounded very strange. An hour later, I got woken up to the singing in the distance again. She was coming back towards us, singing the same rain song. As she passed us, I could hear a little exasperation in her voice. She continued singing and went back in the direction of the trailhead. Another hour later, I was again woken up by her singing as she was again coming back towards us, except now she was also crying. She continued to cry and sing as she moved past us for the final time. We woke up that morning, looked at each other, said what the fuck was that? And then got on our way. It was very eerie at the time, and I don't have an explanation for it. We were in an extremely isolated location and the trail was definitely only used by recreational hikers, so I really can't say why this woman was out wandering, singing, and crying at 3 a.m. Was camping with a friend in Zion and had just laid down to go to sleep. Hear big footsteps right outside of the tent. We say hello but don't hear any response. Hit the side of the tent to scare away whatever animal was there. Didn't hear any retreating footsteps. Looked outside and there was nothing there. A few, silent, minutes later, heard the footsteps right outside the tent again. No approaching sound or anything. Probably was a deer or elk or something but was terrifying. It happened when I was out hunting squirrels and camping with friends in a park in Vermont in early October. All I had was a .22 rifle as did my two friends. Well, we hiked about 6 miles into I think it was Camel's Hump State Forest, I can't remember. It gets really dark really quick in forest so we set up camp and ate the squirrels we took that day. I could not find for the life of me 2 trees to set my tent up with near my friends and near the campfire, so I set up my tent maybe 500 feet from the camp. We are all tired having hiked and hunted all day and called it a night. Well, here is my first fuck up or blessing. I did not have a flashlight because my friends ran out of batteries, so I gave him mine. Second fuck up was how far away I was from the fire. Anyways, I make it to my tent and get into my sleeping bag. It takes a while for me to sleep, so I was up just laying there. All of a sudden I hear what sounds like trees falling and breaking, loud cracks from the trees breaking and brush moving about, but it is far off. For the next 20 minutes it seems about the same farness away. I finally fall asleep but I wake up from noise. This time it is much closer, but still pretty far out. I just think it is critters, maybe a beaver or fish or cat, even though I heard trees or twigs snapping. However, this time, it keeps getting closer. Then I hear what sounds like a giant man stomping his feet and I hear it coming right to my tent. It gets extremely loud. I do not even have my .22 rifle on me, it is in my friend's tent. For the next 30 minutes I hear this thing coming towards me until I swear it was at most 15 yards away from my tent, and at this time I know it must be a moose or bear. I was more worried about it being a moose because it was during rut and people say they are the most dangerous animal in Vermont. This thing is right next to me in the pitch black and I can't shine a light on it to see what it is, thankfully, because being young and stupid I probably would have. It was probably there for 30 minutes, then something spooked it. I guess it was me when it smelled me or I made a noise. Luckily it didn't attack my tent. We woke up the next day and saw the largest moose prints I have ever seen right near my tent. I swear since it was during rut, if I coughed or sneezed it would have attacked me. That was one time I felt I was close to being killed. It is also why I carry a .44 mag with +P+ solid cast buffalo boar with me when I hike during rut in the Northeast now. My old man was an avid outdoorsman in the Colorado Rockies in the late 80s. He'd go on week-long treks with his buds. One summer they'd been out for a few days in Pikes National Forest. They set up camp in a ravine they thought was safe. That night my dad unzipped the tent to take a leak in the dark and outside stood a pair of pale bare feet. My dad screamed and zipped up the tent. Everyone else woke up and asked what was wrong. My dad said someone was barefoot out there. They went out and flashed their lights for a bit, hollering. My dad swore he saw what he saw and described the feet in detail. They were old blotchy feet, one even had a lump on the ankle. Tony, his bud, asked which foot, left or right. My dad said it was the right. Then Tony said they needed to move their camp immediately. Dad asked why. Tony said they didn't have time. They went along with it and packed up and moved on top of the hill. The next morning they woke up to find a flash flood had torn through the ravine during the night. It would have surely killed them. Tony's grandfather had just died a month prior, and one of the last things he said to him was that he would always watch over him. The feet my dad described reminded Tony of his grandfather's very feet. My dad is highly religious. Supernatural or not, someone's visions of paranoia saved their lives that night. I went camping in southeast Ohio once with my dad and sister miles from civilization. As it started to get dark, my dad and I started to prep food for the fire while my sister went to change in her tent. A couple minutes later she walks over to me and asks, "Were you outside my tent?" I asked her why and she tells me that someone walked out from the direction of the trees to her tent and placed their hand on the wall of the tent. She smacked the hand away thinking it was me fucking with her, but when she came out no one was there. We tell my dad and he says he did it and left it at that. The problem there was I knew it wasn't him because I was with him the whole time. Later that night I asked him why he lied and he told me it was too late to go home, so there's no sense in scaring my sister when there's nothing to do about it. I stayed in my sister's tent that night with a knife in hand and didn't sleep. We stayed for another night without incident, but I couldn't get my mind off of the fact that we weren't alone. I have this nifty little hammock tent thingy that I camp. It's a canvas hammock with a weatherproof shell that you can't see out of. And one time, one of the flaps to my hammock just started going crazy like a cat was pawing it at the way they do at doors they want out of. So I play it off as the wind, but then realize Therese no wind. So I just go try and close my eyes, and it happens again 2 minutes later. So this time I think to myself it's probably a raccoon, and I smack the side of my tent, and then all of a sudden I hear some heavy ass footprints running away after I smack my tent. That was one of the closest times I had come to shitting myself, so I just keep laying there for like an hour before coming to the conclusion that whatever was bugging me is gone. I fall asleep. Next morning when I wake up and look around and see some weird looking footprints, like mini bear tracks would be the closest I can think of, but the weird part is they're only around my hammock, and Therese no tracks leading up to my tent but Therese tracks leading away. Still don't know what that shit was, but I only stayed at that site for one night. I went camping for a weekend with my best friend and her dad when we were about 15 or so. On the last night there, I woke up in the middle of the night. It must have been 3 a.m. or later. I didn't check the time because there was someone walking. You could hear the soft crunchy rustle of pine needles. It had the pace and sound of a large person. The footsteps walked straight to the tent that me and my best friend were in and just stopped. I couldn't see a shadow or silhouette, but I wasn't sure if that was because the moonlight was just at a different angle. I thought I was going to die. My best friend turned out to have heard it too, as staring at me. We never heard footsteps leave. We would have heard it because we stayed awake until the sun came up. No footsteps walking away and no shadow. We didn't get out until we heard her dad wake up and start setting up the campfire again, then we ran out and started screaming and crying. We both confirmed with each other what we heard and saw. She looked for the shadow also, but there was nothing. Her dad looked around the entire campsite and didn't find a single thing out of place. It was very weird. The freakiest thing was thinking that something could have stood outside the tent, observing us somehow. It definitely felt like it knew we knew it was there, if there was anything at all. I love to camp and hike and hunt, but this isn't actually my story. I grew up in the Rockies and my dad and his best friend would go camping a lot. They were business partners, so sometimes after a rough week at work they would load up a truck and disappear for a couple days. One very snowy weekend they did just that and went way up in the mountains. They didn't take a tent but instead built a lean-to with a tarp so that the heat from their fire would get caught underneath and keep them warm. Way warmer than a tent. When they woke up the next morning there were mountain lion tracks in the snow all around their campsite and a few just inches from where their heads were laying. They came home early. My brothers and I have a cabin in Virginia. We had been hunting the land for years. One trip I stumbled upon a road I have never noticed before. It looked like the deer had been using this road frequently, so I was excited at my discovery. But as I walked the dread set in and I became very nervous, like I did not belong and I was unwelcome. I pushed forward anyway as the sign of deer was overwhelming. At the end of the road is a house, or what was left of one, that had burned in a fire. My skin is crawling at this point and every instinct I have is telling me to leave, and soon I cannot ignore it and leave quickly. Later in the cabin I recounted my trip only to find my brothers both found the same road and had the same experience. That was 20 years ago and we have not been back. Last year I tried to take my 45-year-old brother to the house, and he was terrified and was literally screaming at me to stop. I was driving a truck. We did find out what happened there after talking to the locals. A woman burned to her death. It's the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. I was camping with 3 friends way out in the middle of Wyoming. I mean far out. We had to hike for an entire mile from the dirt road that went 3 miles off the paved road into the wilderness. The nearest town was at least 2 hours away and it had like 3 buildings. Anyway, we are all sitting around the campfire around 2 a.m. talking when all of a sudden a man walked out of the darkness and approached us. Admittedly we were all a little drunk but not enough to imagine this. He was holding a pie with 1 slice missing. He said, "Y'all want the rest of this?" My bewildered friend said sure THX and took the pie. Without another word the man went back into the woods. We all sort of stood there looking at each other waiting for someone to explain what the fuck was going on. No one knew. It was super fucking weird. The oddest part was that the effing pie was cold. What? And yes, we ate the pie. Not me, but I know a few weird things that have happened here on Kauai. I've heard of some people experiencing night marchers, which are a group of walking warriors. You can hear horns and or see torches in the distance at night, and when you do, you need to lie face down and don't look at them. You're not worthy of looking at them. People who are Hawaiians are more likely to survive the experience because many have ancestors who were once night marchers. The best way to survive, as some say, is to take off your clothes, piss on yourself, controversial, and like I said, lie face down. Menehunes are also a thing I hear about a lot. My great-grandpa had a menehune problem which ended up with small muddy footprints around on his walls and ceilings. My great-grandpa went outside and shot bullets into the sky with his shotgun and yelled cause he was pissed. Hard to clean mud footprints all over the ceiling. Lots of weird stuff happen here in Hawaii, but the ones I mentioned were the most prevalent in what I've heard. Most of these experiences also happen in the wild, especially night marchers. It was during an archaeology field school I was on in Utah. Everyone returned to their tents to sleep but myself and a couple of friends decided to sit up for a while longer and enjoy the cool night air in the canyon and chat a little more. Greg was the first to notice it. He went quiet and told us to shush and listen. It took about half a minute and all three of us could hear it. It was some sort of chanting, a song. It got a little louder, like the people singing were moving closer, but there was no one else in the canyon but us. We listened and the chanting kept going for what seemed like a few minutes before it died down and stopped. We figured it had to have been some group somewhere in the canyon doing some ritual. We weren't scared, more like contented and peaceful. It felt, I dunno, right in some way. The next morning during breakfast we mentioned this incident to our professor and said we thought he told us we'd be alone in the canyon. He said we are alone and then with a smile he said he knew the song we heard. He heard it also at one time. He asked the tribal shaman about it and our professor was able to repeat the chant to the shaman. The shaman told him it was the song of the air, sung by the gods when they are pleased with someone's presence. Professor told us it meant we were welcomed by the gods of the canyon, that we were warriors protecting the tribe. Likely one of the worst things I have ever experienced. Senior year of high school, a friend and I went camping in a canyon in the Texas Panhandle. Knew a park ranger, so we got in through a back way and took some quads to a remote campsite and set up. We cook some food and head into the tent and I doze off. I wake up to the fire going and can see a shadow of a person around it. I roll over and my friend is right next to me still. We both stare at each other and jump up and out of the tent, and as we do someone or something took off running through the canyon. You could tell our stuff had been gone through as if they were looking for something specific. No valuables were taken, the quads were fine, wallet, camera, all there. Still don't know who it was or why they did it, but it is still the scariest thing I have ever experienced in my life. Camped out with a couple friends in the mountains of Maui for 2 days and during the second night, we heard what we thought were the night marchers. They're the spirits of Hawaiian warriors who march to hideouts or battle sites. To see them directly, and more importantly have them see you looking at them, is supposed to be terrible, as in you may be killed and you spirit taken. What you're supposed to do is go inside mainly, but if you can't you lay face down on the floor, don't look up at them no matter what they do. So we were exhausted from finishing a long hike on the second day, and just as we were getting ready to crash early, just after sunset, we hear what sounds like drums. Wasn't loud at first, but got louder over the course of maybe 10 minutes. One of my buddies, who grew up in upcountry and is half Hawaiian, starts to freak out, and tells us to get inside the tents and lay face down until we don't hear drums anymore. I mean like he's wild-eyed and frantic. So we all hustle inside the tent and lay face down on our bags for what seemed like an hour. The drums got louder for maybe 10 more minutes, and after a bit I could hear the sounds of people marching like the clacking of wood, footsteps, and other hard to describe sounds. Right when the sounds got the loudest I started to smell what I thought was maybe roadkill but kind of burnt smelling. After about a minute of that, the smell faded pretty quickly and the sounds got farther away. I didn't move until I heard my friends get up, but we didn't even bother trying to sleep after that. We were heading back to the car first thing in the morning, but we decided to pack out then and there. This happened maybe 2 years ago, and while we have gone camping since then, we now avoid that area and generally stay closer to home. Not a camper, but we were dumb teenagers. We drove deep into a rubber estate late at night, with 2 cars full of beers. The shrubs were literally brushing against the car sides, so we had to go deeper in order to find a proper clearing to park. We reached an unusually large clearing, and there was an old English colonial-style house there, with an padlocked gate. I guessed it used to house the estate governor back in the day, and maybe the house was built smack in the middle of the estate so he could be in the thick of things. There was no moonlight, so it was absolute darkness. Imagine not even being able to see your hand placed right in front of your eyes. The cars provided just enough light for us to hang about and get drunk. I then noticed one of my friends was missing. There was just enough light to see a shadow, him standing right before the house gate, transfixed and looking in, despite not being able to see a single thing. We go and pull him away, and he says in a daze, that there was a young girl in a yellow dress calling him from inside the house. We should have been creeped out, but we were drunk and forgot about it. The next day, my friend's grandfather, we were staying at his village house, which was built on stilts, meaning it was elevated, said he saw a young girl in yellow staring into the veranda, and asked us if she was our friend. Years and years ago, I was on honeymoon with my now ex-wife in the Pocono Mountains. We walked halfway up this mountain in the middle of the night. It was a beautiful, full moon summer night and we did what we went up there to do. We were sitting on a blanket, watching the stars and talking about all the plans we had for our life together when we noticed that there was a pretty large bonfire down in the valley with a bunch of little fires moving around it. It was the weekend so we didn't think much about it. The next morning we were talking to one of the hotel employees and remarked about the people dancing around the bonfire. He explained that a number of other guests had commented about seeing the Native Americans but that there were no Native American festivals or anything else going on. We made it a point to walk through that valley later on that day and there was no tire tracks, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. I've heard a lot of theories explaining it, but it's always bugged me. I was doing a 12-mile in-out day hike that was intermediate advanced. There were very few other hikers we passed on the trail. About halfway through, a girl, looked about 11 to 12, passed us walking back the way we came from. Nothing too strange, some parents take their teens on some heavy trails. It was weird she didn't have a pack or water bottle, but again, we figured she was in a group or with her parents. Weird thing was we didn't see anyone else after her until the turnaround point. And we didn't see anyone before her for a couple hours. If she was alone, she was grossly unprepared for the trail and the trailhead was an hour's drive from any towns. We were keeping a lookout on our way back for her because we expected she would need help/rescue. We even double-backed on a few alternate routes. We didn't find anyone. Filed a report with the park, just in case. Always wondered what happened to her. It was high elevation gains, took us 7 hours up and 4 hours down. How someone could make it through that hike with no gear, let alone water, I have no clue. My mom tells this story often. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard it for 23 years. She and 2 other friends were drinking and driving, I know. This was the late 70s in South Carolina on back dirt roads. They all had to pee so they stopped. She said she went kinda deep into the woods away from her friends because she had had 3 beers and didn't want them hearing her pissing like a horse. She said she had just squatted to pee when she felt like she was being watched. She said it was pitch black and sobered up instantly. Finished peeing and started to walk back to the truck when she heard crashing behind her like trees falling over. She glanced back and huge orange eyes. Of course she started to run. By the time she made it back to the other 2, they were freaking out, screaming her name to make sure she was okay. They heard trees breaking and earth ripping. They all leap into the truck. My mom claims one guy jumped in the truck after her so quickly, she was in the middle, that he dislodged her hip. She claims it was Bigfoot. But I don't even know. When I lived in North Dakota at the age of 12 or 13, Glenburn, North Dakota, something woke me up sometime after midnight but before any light of the sun in the sky. There is a little ledge from a brick wall on the side of house that my brother and I would sit on. I go out on it and look over to our backyard and I see about 7 to 10 Native American men, one wearing a full headdress, doing a dance around a blue flamed fire. I heard their singing and everything, it was amazing, until the man with the headdress looked straight at me. I got terrified and beat feet back into my room, I never moved so fast. I went down to look in the morning. Nothing was disturbed and 0 evidence of fire was ever there. Every one of those men were as real as any person I have ever seen. The look on the man's face was serious, but no real discernible emotion since I was far away to make out, just that I knew it was a serious look. This took place in the summer. That was the only time I have ever seen that. I guess it's not creepy or unexplained, but it was still kinda cool. One year elk hunting about 10 years ago in northern Utah, we packed a few miles on our horses. We stopped in one mountain meadow where I happened to see some carvings on an old aspen tree. For anyone unfamiliar, they're a white tree kinda similar to birch and will develop black scars that grow with the tree as it ages. Anyways, the carvings ended up being a story told by an old hunter. He told the story of being confronted by a wolverine while hunting with his dog. The dog and the wolverine ended up in a battle to the death right there in front of the shocked man. While watching his dog being torn to pieces in front of him, he pulled out his .357 revolver and had to shoot the animal off of his dog. If I remember correctly, the dog lived. The wolverine, however, was not so lucky. It was a really cool experience since what you normally see carved into the trees are the initials of lovers and travelers. My dad and his brother were camping one time in the literal middle of nowhere. Like no other human being in a 30-mile radius nowhere. So everything is normal when they set up a tent and hang out, have a fire, and then they hear an awful scream. It was a rabbit that had probably been killed by a coyote or something, so they grab their shotguns just in case one of those dogs venture too close. Now my dad describes it as a night. In hindsight, that was far too still. No wind, no sounds, nothing. He didn't hear animals or anything, not even insects, he says. So they didn't hear the sound of a rabbit scream again, and after another hour or so he and his brother crash for the night. They then hear the sound again after going inside their tents, and again about 3 hours later. They're not worried about it at this time and go to sleep. They wake up and take a look and walk around the campsite, but don't take 10 steps out, as there are 3 or 4 dead rabbits ripped in half with their entrails stretched around their camp in a circle. Blood everywhere and whatnot. The rabbits weren't eaten, all they did was load a gun, pack up and leave. This is actually a true story that happened many years ago now, even though I know it sounds like it's written by some 5-year-old boy. I was camping with my family in a campsite, and it was nighttime. I was in my own tent since I was a young adult at the time and liked my privacy, but they were all inside the fifth wheel sleeping. I heard a loud bang coming from near the fifth wheel, and then a loud fart. Of course I laughed and said something because I assumed it was someone in my family coming outside for some reason. But I got no response. Then I heard a fart coming from behind my tent, then from the other direction, and then I started hearing farts coming from all over our little campsite, at the same time, as if there were multiple people farting everywhere. Of course I thought it was a prank, so I just started laughing hysterically. But then amongst the farts, I started hearing what I can only describe as plops of water falling all around my tent. I kept asking what they were doing out there, and no one responded to me, and I didn't hear any footsteps. Then the commotion got really loud with farts, plops of water whirling around my tent like a tornado, and I saw their shadows/silhouettes against my tent, and whatever they were not human. They looked like little flying fairies, maybe birds? But what birds would do that at night or in general? They were flying, they were definitely not touching the ground. They began circling my tent so fast. It's the only time in my life that I was laughing and terrified at the same time. I ended up yelling for my family. My mom came out of the fifth wheel and it all stopped. I got out of my tent and no one was there. I asked her if they were responsible for all the farts, and she said they were all asleep before I woke them up. They didn't believe my story, no one ever does, but I swear I did not hallucinate this or dream it. When I checked outside and around my tent, the ground was completely dry, which weirded me out because I heard those sounds like buckets of water dropping on the ground. I did scope round the campsite too, found no evidence of kids pranking me or anything. It was really weird. My family thought I was crazy after that. I worked at an outdoor/sleepaway summer camp a number of years ago. During a late night staff meeting, we heard what sounded like a baby crying in the woods. Bone-chilling scary. Myself and 2 other counselors decided to check it out. We headed into the woods, only to discover a dying rabbit on the bank of a stream, with its blood flowing down it. We were all absolutely mortified, the poor thing was ripped open. Thinking, stupidly, a fox had done it, one of the people I was with told us to go back and he would put it out of its misery. Within sight of the staff house, the counselor who stayed behind comes running past us, covered in blood. We catch up and get back to staff house, where the meeting was just wrapping up. Here we discovered that the thing trying to kill the rabbit was a cougar, and a big one at that. He only got away from it by throwing the now dead rabbit at it, which is why he was covered in blood. The camp was put in wildlife lockdown for the night, and multiple wildlife rangers were called in to help find and trap the cougar. Deep Woods, Western Washington, State. So me and friend, was summer 1991, we were tracking a deer fallow in a creek, muddy and stuff. Yes, funds, about 4 maybe 5 mules from the nearest anything, and suddenly we run into this kid just standing near a small pool of still water in the creek, muddy on one side, about 10 to 15 foot sheer drop to the water on the other, and the other side, so we are all like WTF, we strike some small talk with cuz, wheel. He is in middle of nothing alone, can't speak for anyone but myself when I say I was concerned, ask him stuffs, like, what you up to? He says fishing, there's some trout in here, small talk goes on a bit, keep in mind he was maybe 8 to 10. We are at least 4 miles from anything at all. Asked him, hey, where'd you come from? He replies with, while pointing off into the woods with, oh, I live just up the road there. So we basically wander off following the tracks for a bit, lose him, so we are like, let's check on that kid, takes about an hour or to get back to where he was, find the spot, nothing at a LL. Only our tracks left in the super soft soil, no kid, no tracks other the US than the deer. We look for about 30 minutes or so, not a damn thing, nothing, no trace at all. I was camping and I woke up in the middle of the night to some growling. I looked outside my tent and I swear to God I saw eyes. It was pitch black. I just stared at the eyes. They didn't blink or anything. When my eyes adjusted, there was this massive bear about 10 feet away from me just staring. I was so scarred I grabbed a stick I had been whittling the end like a spear point and just sat there. After about 5 minutes it just walked away. I left the campground early and have never returned. I will never forget that. It still makes me shudder at the memory. I worked as a forest fire ranger for 3 years while in college. We often spent up to 20 days in the bush, moving campsites as we worked along the fire edge. One night I got up to urinate with a lantern. I could hear some branches and movement at the edge of our camp. Wild animals never really bothered me over the years. We had many encounters with bears especially that would try to get into our food. Me not thinking too much, made a little yip to see if I could stir something into running off. I used the lantern and could see the reflection of 2 sets of eyes in the light but not much else of an outline in the woods. They were spaced out about 20 feet from each other. I turned into camp pretty damn quickly and got the chainsaw we used for cutting trees and making camps. Ripped it wide open and scared those buggers off. It was a pack of wolves, unknown number, that had been curious enough to come inspect our camp. I fully understand that the wolves would not likely have ever even thought about attacking our camp, especially with 4 adults there. But there was something incredibly unsettling about the way they stalked in and sat there when caught. Most unsettled experience I ever had in the woods. Not my story, but some friends of my dad's from work. One spring during runoff season they were taking a river boat up into a remote drainage for work back in the good old days of paper maps and no radio contact in the back of Beyond. As they were heading out in the morning and a fair ways up they saw a guy just sitting on the edge of the river. Buddy waved hi but nothing really twigged with them as odd at that point. They were way far out at that point, beyond maintained roads, but this is hunter and trapper territory a bit so not unheard of to see people. They never saw a camp or tent or anything, just that guy. On the way out the guy was sitting in the same spot, did the same little wave, still no camp. They thought it over for a moment and just felt weird about it so they turned around to go back to talk to him and see what was up. They got back to him and talked to him. He had crossed the Rockies and had lost his pack in a river crossing and just kept wandering. No food, early spring so not a lot of food available from the land. He was starving and had sat down to die, and at the point he was seen he thought he was dead already. They had to convince him to come with them in the boat and are still not sure how they ever did it. They got him out to civilization and to help, and he spent a long time in a hospital psychiatric ward being convinced he was still alive. About 15 years ago my buddy and I decided to go for a last-minute overnight backpacking trip near Holy Jim Canyon in Orange County, California. We parked in a random area and just sort of headed out into the wilderness, not following any sort of a trail. We hiked for about 2 hours and were pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We set up our camp next to a little creek. It was still a couple of hours before the sun would set, so we were just chilling. My buddy was sitting by the creek with his dog Merlin. My buddy was a bit random and said, "See Merlin, this is where we worship Satan." About 10 seconds later we could hear someone walking up through the brush. We look over and this guy walks right up to us with this huge wolf dog. I shit you not, this dude was like super ripped and was not wearing a shirt. He had on red shorts and had these massive flame tattoos on his chest. He said something along the lines of "cool campsite." We said thanks. He then asked us if we were planning on spending the night. We said yeah, and then he said "cool, see you later," and then he walked off. We both sat quiet for a few minutes trying to digest what happened. We kind of retraced the story. Okay, we are in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Right after my friend says some BS comment about worshipping Satan, this dude just shows up. He's like a 2-hour hike from anything and he doesn't have anything with him, no water, nothing. He's got this huge beast dog that doesn't have any collar or leash. The guy is like perfectly jacked, wearing all red, and has fucking flame tattoos. Then he had some seriously brief but super odd conversation with us where he said he would see us later after telling him we were spending the night. At that point we packed up our shit faster than we ever had before and got back to our car before the sun set. I don't know what the hell that was, but it was such an odd experience. I used to live in an old cabin in the woods, by myself, with a dog. The cabin itself was on a lake, which had no other houses or road access other than my own. I'm a country person and grew up hunting, fishing, and more or less living in nature. I know what everything in those woods sound like. I know how sounds distort in quiet places. I can stand with my eyes closed on a summer day and tell you which insects are flying by my head by the sound of their wings. There have only been 2 times that I couldn't tell what made a sound, and both those times freaked me out. The first was when was hunting coyote. I was on the edge of a field with my rifle, with my back against a tree. The snow had just started to come down and it was a perfect day to lie up and wait on a coyote to come sniffing around for rabbit, as rabbits like the overcast weather. I was listening intently, trying not to move a muscle, and I heard something behind me that chilled me. The best way I could describe it was a guttural groaning, but like a dual-tone sound, sort of like the Buddhist throat singing. I also heard something on two legs, very slowly shambling towards me. I didn't want to turn around and lose my position, so I just listened more. It was totally unexplainable. I obviously don't believe in zombies, but I'll be damned if it didn't sound like one. It freaked me out enough to where I just got up and left. The second thing was at night when I was lying in bed. I heard what can only be described as someone throwing a bowling ball into the water. Kersplows. Now I know what a beaver slapping the water sounds like, and that's more of a pow. I also know what turtles sound like dropping off a log. There was nothing in the animal kingdom that was doing this. It sounded like very large, spherical rocks, and nothing else. I heard it a few more times and turned on my porch lights. Heard it maybe 6 more times and then that was it. Absolutely baffled. Someone else online seemed to have a similar experience when fishing at night and attributed it to Bigfoot. I'm not a believer, so we'll stick that in the WTF pile. My brother went hiking in Colorado. It was a nice trip, so I heard, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On the way back to the car it starts to get dark and his buddy goes ahead to make sure they are on the right path, because of loops and such. My brother comes up on him in a clearing and he was standing there holding a big walking stick like a staff, clearly looking like he was expecting a fight. My brother, already feeling a little creeped out, is immediately on alert and asks what's wrong. His buddy then shows him their tracks in the dirt headed in. They were the only ones on the trail, so their footprints were clear, and there was another track on top of one of their footprints, so it clearly came after. It belonged to a mountain lion. The mountain lion tracks were following their tracks up the trail, stalking them. Seeing as it was getting dark and mountain lions are somewhat nocturnal, they were pretty freaked out, and my brother's friend was sure one of them was going to get ambushed when they had separated. They never actually saw the mountain lion, but there were more tracks clearly showing that it had been stalking them for a while and probably did all the way back to the car. It's not exactly unexplained, but they certainly were creeped out and had a legitimate concern for their lives.